Ah, my young friend, the winds of history sometimes whisper to us from forgotten lands. Today, I will take you to the windy plains of Gaul, to the year 451. At that time, the world was under the shadow of two mighty powers, the grandeur of Rome and the fearsome armies of Attila. It was here, at the climax of this clash, that the story was written on the plains of the Catalaunian field. A day when swords gleamed like steel and the battle cries shook the sky. But this is not just a tale of war. It is also the story of strategy, betrayal, friendship, and courage. I will tell you how Aetius, Rome's last great general, fought against Attila, the undefeated leader of the Huns. Now, lean back and close your eyes. For what you are about to hear is not just history. It is a legend that shaped the destiny of humanity. Ah, my dear friend, now let me take you to the glorious yet fragile times of Rome. Once, the great empire was the master of the known world. Yet, like every grandeur that eventually faces inevitable collapse, Rome too began to crumble under its own weight. These were the days when the empire was split into East and West. A time when the unity of Rome was faltering. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, sailed towards a wealthier and stronger future behind the golden walls of Constantinople. Meanwhile, the Western Roman Empire, weakened by barbarian invasions and internal strife, was slowly exhausting itself. Imagine this. The capital of the West, Ravenna, had become the seat of power, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. In the old capital of Rome, only echoes remained. But this is not just Rome's story. From the east, a dark shadow was beginning to fall over Europe. That shadow was the vast empire of the Huns. When they first appeared on the stage of history, the Huns might have seemed like mere terrifying nomadic warriors, bringing destruction to Europe. But their leader, Attila, that is a tale unto itself. Attila became one of the most feared names in history. He was known as the Scourge of God, for even his presence seemed like a punishment. But Attila was not just a savage warrior. He was also a brilliant strategist and a master diplomat. He brought the Huns from the harsh steppes to these lands, uniting different tribes and forging them into a single mighty fist. How did he do it? Through power, fear, and promises. Attila's rise coincided with the fall of Rome. The Western Empire could no longer defend its borders, and Attila's armies were marching toward Gaul. Even the Eastern Roman Empire was not safe from his threat. Just a few years earlier, Attila had inflicted a crushing defeat on Byzantium, coming all the way to the gates of Constantinople. He forced Byzantium to sign a peace treaty in exchange for gold and tribute. Such was the power of a leader who stood against the mighty Roman Empire. But my friend, this is only the beginning. The Roman and Hun empires were not only enemies, they were rivals written into the very path of fate. The clash of these two great powers was not just a battle, it was the collision of two worlds. Now, to understand the rest of this story, we shall step onto the dusty roads of those days together. Remember, Attila was not just the leader of the Huns, he was the enemy of one empire and the test of another. Ah, my dear friend, in those days the lands of Europe were not only the arena for swords and battle cries, but also for complex relationships and secret treaties. The Roman Empire, once a mighty force holding every corner of the world in its grasp, was now forced to form alliances with barbarian tribes in order to survive. The Visigoths. This people was both an ally and a threat to Rome. The Western Roman Empire wanted to use their warrior spirit for its own benefit. They offered them lands, struck deals, but each alliance was shadowed by mutual distrust. King Theodoric of the Visigoths, while allied with Rome, also sought to protect the interests of his own people. To Rome, he was a friend, but one who could be turned into an enemy if the need arose. Rome had similar dealings with the Franks and Burgundians. However, these alliances were fragile, like walking on ice, easily shattered and filled with peril. At the time, each barbarian tribe acted in its own interest, and Rome, once the ruler of these people, now had to negotiate around the same table. Friend. This is where the real story begins. Attila entered the midst of these complicated relationships, playing a masterful game of chess. Gaul, in his eyes, was not just a patch of land, it was the key to the heart of Western Rome. Your gain over the Gauls will determine your gain over the Gauls. Attila's goal was not only to conquer land, he sought to completely cripple the Western Roman Empire by breaking them in Gaul. This region was rich with cities, overflowing granaries, and some of the empire's most valuable territories. It was also home to the Visigoths, allies of Rome. If Attila were victorious in Gaul, he would break Rome's alliances, weaken them, and leave the empire vulnerable to his army's mercy. However, Attila's plans were not solely military. His campaign in Gaul was also driven by economic motives. At the time, the Huns were exerting pressure on Rome to increase the tribute they received. Taking Gaul would send a powerful message to Rome. If you do not obey me, I will take everything from you with my armies. The reasons behind Attila's invasion of Western Roman lands were shaped by this complex context. The Hun Empire was strong, but Attila knew that he needed constant victories to keep his power growing. The Hun warriors were known for their fighting spirit, but they thrived on plunder, staying loyal to their leaders through the rewards of conquest. If the spoils stopped, so would their loyalty. All therefore was firmly in Attila's sights. Beyond its economic rewards, this region also represented the honor of Rome. Rome's heart was there, and Attila sought to bring it to its knees by taking Gaul. But my friend, you must not forget, Attila was not just a conqueror. He was also a master of psychological warfare. He understood that Rome was in turmoil within itself. An empire unable to protect its borders could no longer spread fear among its people and allies. This is why Attila moved not only with an army, but with a strategy. Every step he took was designed to further expose Rome's weaknesses. Yet, my friend, Attila's strategy did not go unnoticed. The last great general of Rome, Flavius Aetius, recognized Attila's plans and acted to thwart them. This tale is not just one of battles, but of minds clashing. Attila and Aetius were like two grand chess players, each predicting the other's moves. And this chessboard would soon host a grand confrontation, one that would be written in history as the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. Ah, my dear friend, the great conflicts in history often begin with a spark. But some sparks do not merely kindle a flame, they ignite a wildfire. And it was this spark, burning at the gates of Orleans, that paved the way to the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. Let me take you back to those days, to the walls of a city trembling under the shadow of Attila's armies. At that time, Attila was advancing deep into Gaul. His army, like a wild torrent, swept across everything in its path, plundering cities and forcing people into submission. But Orleans, Orleans, this city held a special significance for Attila. Its strategic position was not only crucial for Rome, but also key to Attila's plans for dominion in Gaul. If Orleans fell, the gates to Gaul would be wide open. Attila's armies camped before the city walls. Hundreds of Hun cavalrymen with battle cries echoing across the land surrounded the city. No matter how strong the walls were, Attila's determination was stronger still. The people of Orleans were filled with dread. The cruelty of Attila's forces was legendary. Surrender meant slavery, and resistance meant death. Attila refused, giving the captives all. Yet the people of Orleans were determined to fight. The defenders stood firm, defending their walls with their last breath. But alas, this resistance could not last long. The city began to tremble under the pressure of Attila's siege. And then, at that moment, fate revealed another face. The last great general of Western Rome, Flavius Aetius. His name shone like a beacon of hope even during Rome's decline. When Aetius heard of Attila's advance into Gaul, he sprang into action. But Aetius knew that he could not face Attila with just the Roman legions. Rome's forces were weakened, exhausted by barbarian invasions and internal conflicts. So Aetius devised a clever plan. He began forming alliances with barbarian tribes, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Burgundians. He told them that Attila's threat was not only to Rome, but to all of Gaul. If Attila wins, Aetius said, none of you will survive. Aetius rallied these allies, bringing together an army. Securing the support of King Theodoric of the Visigoths, Aetius's success in uniting the barbarian tribes was not just a military achievement, but a diplomatic victory. The tribes of Gaul, who had once been divided, were now united against a common enemy. With his newly formed army, Aetius moved swiftly towards Orléans. His arrival symbolized a new hope, not only for the people of Orléans, but for all of Gaul. Just as Attila's siege was on the brink of success, this united army appeared near the city. Attila, forced to abandon his siege strategy, was left in a difficult position. But my friend, this did not mean he was retreating. No, Attila was never a leader to retreat. In his mind, a new plan was taking shape: the Catalaunian Plains. The plains would soon witness one of the greatest battles in history, finally achieving their dream of salvation and the peace that would deliver them to the world. But where that Orléans was not just a city, it was the turning point where the fate of two great powers collided. Attila and Aetius had begun to test each other's resolve, and this confrontation, the one that would change the course of history, would inevitably lead to the great battle at the Catalaunian Plains. My friend, if you think the story of great conflicts only starts and ends on the battlefield, you're mistaken. Long before swords clash, wars begin in minds and on maps. Before history was made on the plains of Catalonia, both Attila and Aetius were preparing for battle. This wasn't just a war between two armies, it was a battle between two strategies. Attila was much more than a leader, he was the heart of his army. The Hun Empire's military was one of the most terrifying war machines Europe had ever seen. Made up mostly of cavalry, this army was known for its fast, flexible, and deadly attacks. The Huns, almost as if born on horseback, struck like lightning against their enemies. Their attack style might seem chaotic, but it was actually a series of maneuvers carefully planned. Attila's tactics were completely different from the classic Roman legion system. While Roman armies advanced in an orderly, organized fashion, the Huns' forces moved like a storm, striking the enemy from unexpected places. They would retreat strategically, then lure the enemy into ambushes before suddenly surrounding them. The strength of Attila's army lay not only in its physical prowess, but also in its mastery of psychological warfare. But Attila's army wasn't made up of just Huns. There were allied forces from other barbarian tribes, like the Goths, Gepids, and Alans. Attila kept these tribes united through his leadership, charisma, and promises of rich plunder. But, my friend, this kind of alliance was fragile. Victory was the glue that held it all together. Now let's look at the other side. Flavius Aetius, the last great general of Western Rome. He was just as skilled in diplomacy as he was on the battlefield. The power of Rome, once a dominant force over barbarian peoples, had already begun to wane. Aetius knew this, which is why he needed alliances to defeat his enemy, King Theodoric of the Visigoths. His people were once Rome's enemies, but Aetius convinced Theodoric that fighting against Attila was in everyone's best interest. When the Huns rule Gaul, Aetius said, there won't be freedom for either Rome or the Visigoths. Eventually, Theodoric agreed. This wasn't an easy alliance. There was old hostility and mutual distrust. But when the threat is big enough, history sometimes creates the most unlikely friendships. This alliance wasn't just between Rome and the Visigoths. The Franks, Burgundians, and other tribes also joined this large coalition. Aetius's success was in bringing together such different groups around a common goal. But my friend, you shouldn't forget that this alliance came with many uncertainties about how they would act on the battlefield. The Visigoths were loyal to their king, and the other barbarian tribes to their own leaders. Aetius had to unite all these different forces and create an effective battle strategy. Before the Battle of Catalonia, both sides had made their preparations. Attila had confidence in his army. His goal was a quick and decisive victory. Aetius, on the other hand, was relying on the unity of his allied forces. Both sides believed they would win. But my friend, in the end, only one would be victorious. Now the stage was set. Attila's armies and Aetius's allies were heading toward one of the bloodiest battles in history. And we're one step closer to witnessing this great clash of history. This was a time to be drawn into the fervor of the emotions. My dear friend, the great wars of history are shaped not only by the warriors, but also by the land on which the battle is fought. The Battle of Catalonia wasn't just a struggle between people, it was also a fight under the harsh conditions of nature. Now let me take you to that legendary plain, the Catalaunian Plain, where we'll understand how these vast lands, shining under the sun, shaped history. The Catalaunian Plain is located in what is today the Champagne region of France. This plain had wide, flat terrain. The open field, stretching all the way to the horizon, gave these lands a sense of infinity as they met the sky. However, when it became a battlefield, this beauty took on a completely different meaning. The land was fertile, the plains were covered with grain fields and pastures, but that fertility had become useless to any farmer, as it had been turned into a wasteland. Attila's advance had turned the region into a ghost land. Villages were abandoned, fields looted, and the people either fled or hid. Now this vast plain had become an arena where two massive armies would face off. The hills on the east and west of the plain held strategic importance for both sides. These hills gave a commanding position over the battlefield, expanding the army's line of sight. But my friend, don't forget, such areas are only useful to a skilled strategist. When used correctly, the hills could be the key to victory. In the wrong hands, they could become a trap. The Catalaunian Plain offered both advantages and disadvantages to both sides. Attila's army, particularly in flat terrain, had the upper hand. The Hun cavalry would strike like lightning on such open land, using their speed and maneuverability to overpower their enemies. The open terrain was perfect for executing their attack tactics, so Attila was pleased to choose this plain as the battlefield. However, for Aetius and Theodoric, the plain posed a different challenge. Unlike the Huns, the barbarian allies were more inclined toward defense. Infantry forces like the Visigoths and Franks could easily become vulnerable to Hun cavalry attacks in the flatlands. Aetius, knowing this weakness, carefully shaped his strategy. Gaining control over the hills and natural barriers was of vital importance to him. But my friend, this land wasn't just about physical advantages and disadvantages. The vastness of the plain made communication and coordination between both sides more difficult. If an army lost control of such a large area, it could lead to disarray and defeat. Both Attila and Aetius had to show immense leadership skills to keep their armies organized on these vast plains. And here we are, on the Catalaunian Plain, the place where the fate of the battle would be decided. Wide, harsh, and unforgiving. Both sides would race to turn this land to their advantage. But my friend, history teaches us one thing. No matter how strategic the land is, victory is the work of the minds and hearts that govern it. Now we've imagined that battlefield, but remember, this is just a stage. Without the players and their stories, no land can become legendary. And the next step will get even closer to the events that shaped this great clash. My friend. That moment when two massive armies faced each other on the Catalaunian Plain was one where history seemed to hold its breath. The sun had slowly risen over the plain, the air was silent, but this silence was the harbinger of the storm to come. People, horses, and weapons. They were all waiting for the start of this great clash. And then, that moment arrived, and the first sparks of the Battle of Catalonia were ignited. Attila's army had arrived first. The fast-moving cavalry had swiftly crossed the flat terrain of the plain and had taken up defensive positions. Attila, positioned at the center, was overseeing the battlefield, a leader with full control, seeing the entire scene unfold. As was customary, he had positioned his army in a flexible crescent formation, which made it easier to encircle and swiftly disperse the enemy. The first thing the enemy would probably do was to leave his cavalry in flexible formation, which made it easier to encircle and swiftly disperse the enemy. Across from them, the combined army under Aetius and Theodoric had carefully taken their positions. Aetius, using the military discipline and strategic genius of Rome, had organized his forces. The Visigoths formed the left wing, while the Franks and other barbarian allies took the right. Roman troops were at the center, strengthening the defensive line. Aetius and Theodoric shared command of their forces, but had planned the strategy together. The first contact came just as the sun was setting. The Huns' advance guard launched a sudden attack to test the enemy's defense line. This attack rang out like a gong, signaling the start of the battle. However, it wasn't a full-on clash. Rather, it was more of a reconnaissance, a probing move. Attila's tactics were filled with unexpected speed and complexity. The cavalry, under a shower of arrows, would charge forward, then suddenly withdraw with a quick maneuver. Their aim was to disrupt the Roman line and wear down the Visigoths' defenses. The Hun archers dealt damage from a distance, while the cavalry kept shifting positions to confuse the enemy. Aetius, however, continued his command with unwavering calm. He didn't fall for the Huns' retreating maneuvers and kept his forces steady. The enemy will try to provoke you, but patience is the key to victory, he would say, boosting the morale of his troops. Theodoric, on the other hand, led his warriors with courage, fighting in the front lines himself to ensure the defense remained intact. The first hours of the battle flowed like a river. Attack and defense movements followed one another. Neither side had gained a clear upper hand, but that didn't mean the battle was in a state of balance. Every move was shaping the next big strategy. One of the Huns' objectives was to collapse the enemy's flanks. They had focused particularly on putting pressure on the left wing of the Visigoths. In response, Theodoric's forces set up a solid defense line, repelling the attacks. The Visigoth archers were providing effective counterfire against the Hun cavalry, slowing down their advance. And so, history began to be written on the Catalaunian Plain. The initial clashes were just the beginning of the great storm. Attila was searching for his enemy's weak points, while Aetius was trying to buy time and maintain order in his ranks. But my friend, don't forget, this was only the beginning. The true flames of the battle had yet to fully rise. Now before us, there are bigger clashes ahead. And every step will deepen the story of this unforgettable moment in history. My friend, here we are, at the most unforgettable moments of that dark day on the Catalaunian Plain. The first clashes of the battle were like the winds before a storm, but now that storm had gathered strength, ready to tear everything apart. Both sides were suffering tremendous losses, but retreat was no longer an option. And at this point, the course of the battle reached a turning point. Theodoric, the brave and wise king of the Visigoths. At the most intense moments of the battle, he chose to be at the front lines with his people. As an ally of Rome, he wasn't just fighting for his own people, but for the Western Roman Empire as well. However, fate had written the end for this brave king on the Catalaunian Plain. In the middle of the battle, Theodoric was struck by a Hun cavalryman's spear. The story goes that even as he fell from his horse, he didn't abandon the fight, ordering those around him to resist and keep fighting. Theodoric's death sent a shockwave through the Visigoth army. In that moment, both sides on the battlefield felt the loss of this great leader. But this loss didn't mean retreat for the Visigoths. His son Thorismund wasted no time in taking command. His father's death enraged the Visigoth warriors, driving them forward in a thirst for vengeance. Thorismund viewed the spot where his father fell as sacred ground and led his army from there, pushing forward with renewed resolve. Theodoric's death was not a weakness for the Visigoths, but rather a battle cry. And on the other side that day stood Attila the Hun Emperor. Attila was a leader who could see the battlefield like a chessboard, a visionary and determined strategist. In the middle of the battle, he personally managed every movement of his army, always looking for opportunities to guarantee victory. Attila was a constant figure at the forefront, keeping the morale of his soldiers high. Positioned at the center of his army, he wasn't just a commander, he was part of the battle itself. His leadership came not only from his military skills, but also from his unwavering resolve. Attila never allowed his army's discipline or maneuverability to falter. The Hun leader employed a patient tactic to weaken the enemy lines. With constant assaults, he wore down both the Roman and Visigoth forces. But he waited for the right moment to land the fatal blow. This strategy proved that he wasn't just a warrior, but also a great strategist. However, no matter how impressive Attila's leadership was, he faced a united force. Aetius and Pharismon took every opportunity to counter his plans. Even in these critical moments of the battle, Attila remained calm, managing to keep his army intact and continue the fight. Oh, my friend, the battlefield was marked by moments like these. The tragic death of Theodoric and Attila's unshakable leadership were key elements that shaped the fate of the Battle of Catalonia. But this story doesn't end here. The battle is still ongoing, and there are many more moments to be told in this uncertain conflict, my friend. Here we are, at the final act of that unforgettable battle. The blood spilled on the Catalaunian plain had nourished the earth, and the cruel cries of war had been carried by the wind to distant places. As the sun set, the results of this great conflict, which had changed the course of history, were slowly becoming visible. The powerful alliance formed by Rome and the Visigoths was shaped not only by military strength, but also by determination and solidarity. On the battlefield, Flavius Aetius' strategic genius and Thorismund's fiery leadership of the Visigoth army had combined. These people, from two different cultures, had fought that day for one purpose: to stop Attila's advance. By the end of the battle, Attila's army had reached a point of retreat. The Western Roman Empire and its allies had managed to disrupt the Huns' formation, turning the tide of the battle in their favor. This victory became not only a military success for the Roman Empire, but also a symbol of the West's resilience against the barbarian invasions. But remember, this victory came at a heavy cost. The Visigoths had lost a great leader in Theodoric. The Roman army had paid a high price in the blood of its soldiers. Yet in the end, it was the resilience and determination of this alliance that had broken the Hun army's superiority and handed the victory to the Roman-Visigoth alliance. Now, let's look at the other side of the battle. Attila should not be seen as a defeated leader. Yes, his army suffered heavy losses on the Catalaunian Plain, and his plans were disrupted. But Attila was more than just a warrior. He was a strategist who knew when to step back. There were many reasons behind his decision to retreat. First, the Hun army was growing increasingly worn down as the battle wore on. The united strength of the Romans and Visigoths had rendered Attila's attacks ineffective. Second, logistical challenges were also affecting the Hun army. There were not enough supplies and manpower to sustain a prolonged campaign. But most importantly, Attila had always known how to prepare for the next battle. With this retreat, he saved his army from destruction. Attila's withdrawal wasn't a defeat. It was a tactical move. Waiting for another opportunity. He may have lost this battle in Gaul, but his determination to fight on remained undiminished. This decision preserved his army and prevented the Huns from losing their influence in Europe. This leadership approach highlights why Attila remains such a significant figure in history. And so the Battle of Catalonia came to an end. This battle was not just a conflict between two sides. It was a turning point that shaped the fate of Europe. The tragic death of Theodoric, Aetius' strategic victory, and Attila's remarkable leadership are the details that immortalize this story. But my friend, remember, history is more than just victories and defeats. It is a mirror of humanity's struggle for survival, and we in this mirror continue to see the traces of the past. My friend, when the Battle of Catalonia came to an end, not only did the swords return to their sheaths, but the fate of Europe was also reshaped. This battle deeply impacted the balance between the Roman Empire and the barbarian tribes, and it led to the opening of a new chapter in history. With this victory, the Roman Empire had earned a temporary respite. While they may have believed they had gained superiority over the barbarian tribes, this balance was fragile. The Visigoths, through their heroism in this battle, had proven themselves to be one of Rome's most powerful allies. However, the death of Theodoric created a leadership vacuum among the Visigoths, making the Roman-Visigoth alliance more fragile. On the other side, the prestige and power of the Huns began to shake after this battle. The Battle of Catalonia weakened Attila's control over Europe. His retreat made the perception of Hun invincibility seriously questioned for the first time. This event wasn't just about the Hun army's losses on the battlefield. It also impacted the internal balance and leadership structure of the Hun Empire. In the post-battle period, cracks in the Hun Empire became more apparent. After Attila's death, the sense of unity within the empire began to rapidly disintegrate. The different tribes, once united under Attila's strong leadership, reverted to old rivalries and conflicts in his absence. As the Huns quickly lost power, the Roman Empire and the barbarian tribes tried to fill this vacuum. Rome, taking advantage of this weakening, sought to establish more balanced relations with the barbarian tribes. However, the pressure from the barbarian peoples on Europe continued, and the processes leading to Rome's eventual downfall gained momentum during this period. The disintegration of the Hun Empire was part of an inevitable historical cycle. The dissolution of tribes united under a powerful leader after the loss of that leader is a recurring motif in human history. And now, my friend, let us once again talk about the man at the center of this story. Attila, one of history's greatest warriors, a legend. To view him as a mere conqueror would be an injustice to the legacy of this great leader. Attila was known not only for his military prowess, but also for his strategic mind. As he led his armies onto the battlefield, he was always thinking about the next move. To many, he was the leader of the barbarians, a conqueror who shook Rome to its core. Yet he was also a savior and unifier for his people. Although the defeat in the Battle of Catalonia may have cast a shadow over his leadership, Attila's reputation remained unshaken even after this battle. His name continued to be spoken with respect, even among his enemies. The Romans themselves admired his courage and warrior spirit. Very few leaders in history have managed to be both feared and respected like Attila. His name became a legend passed down through the generations. For some, he symbolized barbarism. For others, he was a concrete example of leadership and determination. The Battle of Catalonia had a complex effect on Attila's reputation. Yes, he experienced a strategic retreat and lost his dominance in Europe. However, Attila's leadership and warrior spirit were not diminished by this defeat. His name was still spoken with both fear and admiration. Even among his enemies, Attila was proof of what an influential leader could be. Roman historians often praised his intelligence and determination. This battle further solidified Attila's place in history and made him an immortal figure. Yes, my friend, history knows how to turn great leaders into legends. And Attila, indeed, is one of those legends. Hi, my friend. The Battle of Catalonia was not merely a fight of bloodshed, but also an arena of mind games, strategic moves, and military brilliance. Historians evaluate this battle not only for the size of the armies or the courage of the leaders, but also for the tactics employed and the long-term effects of the war. Come, let us take a closer look at this monumental encounter. Attila's army was renowned for its disciplined Hun cavalry, trained to move quickly across the battlefield. Attila expertly used classic Hun battle strategies, aiming to disrupt and unnerve his enemies, pushing them into losing control. In the early stages of the battle, the Huns employed a deceptive retreat tactic, attempting to lure the Roman and Visigoth forces into a trap. This tactic would force the enemy to lose their discipline, allowing the Hun cavalry to strike with sudden counterattacks and gain the upper hand. However, the Roman-Visigoth alliance, under the leadership of General Flavius Aetius, was well prepared to counter this tactic. Aetius possessed military intelligence that enabled him to anticipate Attila's maneuvers. The Roman and Visigoth armies, maintaining their formation, successfully resisted the Hun cavalry's sudden strikes. Aetius and Theodoric positioned their forces along a wide front, limiting the mobility of the Hun cavalry and forcing them to fight in a narrow space. This significantly neutralized Attila's advantage in speed. Another critical aspect of the battle was the unity of the Roman and Visigoth forces. Normally distrustful of each other, these two powers managed to work in harmony against a common enemy. Especially Theodoric's Visigoth soldiers, who fought courageously on the battlefield, proved to be a vital part of the alliance. Even Theodoric's death did not break the will of the Visigoth soldiers. Instead, they fought even harder, driven by the desire for revenge. Attila's leadership skills also stood out in this battle. Throughout the conflict, he led his forces with order, maintaining his morale and leadership despite unexpected defeats. His decision to retreat was another testament to his strategic intelligence. Rather than accepting defeat, he chose a tactical withdrawal to prevent the annihilation of his army. The Battle of Catalonia is considered a pivotal moment in European history. It greatly impacted the balance of power between the Roman Empire and the barbarian tribes. In the aftermath of the battle, the Huns began to lose their dominance over Europe. While Attila's leadership was sufficient to reorganize his forces, the myth of Hun invincibility came to an end on that battlefield. Other barbarian tribes across Europe realized that resistance against the Huns was possible, which led to the rapid disintegration of the Hun Empire. On the other hand, the Roman Empire's victory delayed the decline of the Western Roman Empire. However, Rome could not derive lasting benefits from this victory. The barbarian tribes had recognized Rome's weakness, and this battle laid the groundwork for the rise of barbarian kingdoms across Europe. The Battle of Catalonia also contains many lessons in military strategy. It highlights the importance of a unified army moving with discipline and coordination. Additionally, it demonstrates how critical it is to predict an enemy leader's tactics in advance. Aetius's strategic leadership and Theodoric's heroism were key in turning the tide in favor of the Roman-Visigoth alliance. Yes, my friend, the Battle of Catalonia has gone down in history as a confrontation that not only shaped the people of that time, but also influenced the strategic thinking of future generations. Attila's leadership, Aetius's brilliance, and Theodoric's courage are the unforgettable heroes of this battle. Their stories continue to echo in the depths of history. Ah, my friend. History is sometimes shaped by the outcome of a single battle, and the Battle of Catalonia is one such moment. This battle was not just a conflict between the Roman Empire and the Huns, but a turning point that determined the future of Europe. Let us reflect together on the historical significance of this pivotal event. The Battle of Catalonia heralded the beginning of a new order in the power struggle between barbarian tribes and ancient empires in Europe. Attila's pressure on the Western Roman Empire had become a serious threat to the lands once dominated by Rome. However, this battle reshaped the delicate balance between the barbarians and Rome. The Visigoths, fighting alongside Rome, transformed their role on the historical stage. Once enemies of Rome, they now gained a new identity as its allies. The heroic stance of the Visigoths in this battle signaled that they would have a significant impact on the future kingdoms of Europe. For the Hun Empire, this battle marked the end of their expansionist period. The defeat at Catalonia struck a blow to Attila's legend and emboldened other peoples in Europe. After this battle, the Huns were no longer seen as an unstoppable force, but as a power in decline. This event accelerated the independent struggles of various European peoples and the birth of new political structures. The Battle of Catalonia was a turning point in shaping the identity of Western civilization. Had Attila won this battle, the history of Europe could have taken an entirely different course. Roman culture and its legacy might have been obliterated under the Huns' dominance. However, this battle gave Western civilization the opportunity to redefine itself. With this victory, the Roman Empire managed to survive for a while longer. Yet it also revealed that Rome's power was no longer at its former glory. This situation led to the beginning of a new order in Europe, the age of barbarian kingdoms. The Visigoths, Franks, and other tribes became the key players in shaping the future identity of Europe. Culturally, the Battle of Catalonia contributed to the preservation of Rome's cultural legacy. Roman legal systems, governance, and architecture continued to evolve after this battle. While the Huns' influence in Europe remained limited, Rome's legacy was inherited by the new kingdoms and passed down to the present day. And so, my dear friend, the echoes of the Battle of Catalonia spread far and wide. This battle was not just about a victory or a defeat. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another. Rome's last struggles, the rise of barbarian peoples, and the retreat of Attila's shadow from Europe. These are all parts of this grand story. History always offers us lessons. The Battle of Catalonia once again demonstrates the importance of strong leadership, strategic thinking, and alliances. And perhaps it reminds us of the most important lesson in human history. No power is eternal. As we close these dusty pages, let us once again salute the infinite depths of history. And remember, understanding the past is the most powerful way to shape the future. Until we meet again in the next story, my friend, let us continue to listen to the whispers of history